So let's jump into introductions real quick. If you can jump to the next slide, please. So um, our our honored guest today, our superstar of the show today is Rob Burkey, and he's the Associate Director of Research Computing Services. And he gave me a bio, so I'll read these because I don't want to get it wrong. So Rob Burkey is Associate Director of Research Computing Services at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and that's in Boston. He works closely with researchers and IT teams to design and operate the infrastructure that supports data-intensive cancer research, including large-scale storage, compute environments, and long-term data preservation. His team focuses on ensuring scientists can securely store, access, and analyze rapidly growing data sets while maintaining the reliability and scalability required for modern research workflows. So if you wouldn't mind, Rob, can you say hello?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or as we decided before, good day. I'm happy to be here and share hopefully some wisdom. Whenever people tout me as a luminary or what other words that Ted has used, I feel uncomfortable, but I'll do my best to live up to your expectations.
I'll tone it down, Rob. From Next, I'd like to introduce Eric Polet from Arcitecta, and just to give you some perspective, and you'll hear a little bit more about how this architecture, this storage architecture works. But think of Arcitecta as the brains behind all of this. And Eric is a data management leader with over 15 years of experience turning complex, large-scale data challenges into practical outcomes. He leads marketing for Architecta's Media Flux, helping simplify petabyte scale workflows and driving real business and research impact. Known for a steady results focused approach, Eric champions measured innovation that delivers lasting value. And so, Eric, would you please say hello?
Yeah, good day. And thank you for having me on and joining Rob for this webinar here. We really appreciate it.
And I guess good day is an appropriate greeting since Architecta is based in Australia, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then last but not least, we have my colleague Nathan Halverson, who is a solutions architect manager at Spectra Logic. He specializes in designing comprehensive data management and storage solutions. And I should have put in the word customized. So these are always done with the customer's interests in mind in terms of budget and problems that they have to solve. And so Nathan is an integral part of that process. He helps organizations handle, protect, and preserve their growing digital assets. He has a strong background in data lifecycle management. He works very closely with our clients and our customers to architect, implement, design, optimize hybrid cloud, object storage, and tape solutions, particularly within data-intensive industries like research and national labs and scientific applications. And then lastly, Nathan he brings an extensive level of expertise in optimizing those data workflows and long-term retention strategies. Nathan, if you wouldn't mind saying hello.
Hello, everyone. Good day. Happy to be here and happy to provide insight from Spectra's perspective.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Like I said, I'm really excited about this topic today because this is really, first of all, we've got Rob representing one of the world's foremost cancer institutes. And I was actually doing a little bit of homework before the webinar this week on Dana-Farber. And I would say the word that kept coming up again and again is breakthrough. So I think Dana-Farber is known globally as an organization that delivers breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough when it comes to cancer research. And they've also really pioneered for over 70 years a tremendous body of research and clinical capability. So it's not only just research, but it's married with, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, I'll give you a chance to elaborate a little bit with the Harvard Medical School. So world-class and world-class research, world-class cancer institute, world-class hospital located in Boston, Massachusetts. So Rob, if you wouldn't mind, would love to hear a little bit tell us a little bit about what makes Dana-Farber Cancer Institute so incredible in terms of, the world looks up to the world of cancer research, cancer treatment looks up to Dana-Farber. And then if you wouldn't mind after that, kind of tell us a little bit about, what your organization does to serve the mission of Dana-Farber.
Certainly. So I think at the forefront of Dana-Farber's mission is very patient first focused. We deeply care about the patient, and making sure that they go through their cancer journey, which is frightening for anybody who's ever gone through it. And everybody's been touched either themselves personally or, a very close relative or family friend. Um, so we strive for that. But one of the other things that makes Dana-Farber great, other than our patients, which is very hard for me to say other than our patients, but other than our patients, is that we're very much are a 50% clinical, 50% research focused organization. So we have a bed to bedside approach that what happens with our patients can go back to research. Researchers can work on that data and then come up with new treatments that can then go back to the bedside, which makes it a really great synergy between the two of them. And by having so many clinicians that are also researchers, to be able to work on that too, it's a very tight circle, and it makes us really good at what we do. I would say the best at what we do. I said earlier I was biased when I said that, but it's I'm very proud of where I work and what we do because I see miracles every day. As far as what my role is at Dana-Farber, I'm on the research half of the hospital. So I said I was the Research Computing Services Associate Director, which means that my team handles all the IT needs for the research half of the hospital. So it's compute and storage and cloud, desktop support, all the things that researchers would need to do their job. And I see my primary focus is making it so that science can happen for them. So whatever solutions we need to bring in to make it so that they can do their jobs so that while the clinicians are working on today, helping today's patients, we can work on having no patients, is really what the goal is. The future of zero cancer is really what I strive for every single day of working in my life. So
That's it's a great mission. I think we can all relate to the importance of what you all are doing. Can you give us a little bit more, and maybe we can jump to the next slide. So we have, a number of things that we were trying to solve for you, Rob. Actually, can you go to the top? There we go.
perfect.
So a couple of the challenges that you had mentioned to us, Rob, is that, and this is my word, you might have been a little overpronated on cloud storage and it was creating some cost issues. And you were noticing that your primary storage on premise was under a lot of pressure. And so you wanted to create this additional tier. It was initially, you guys were all flash, all disk, no tape, but you pivoted into tape. Can you take us a little bit through that at the high level about what you were trying to solve and how you ended up here?
Certainly. So when we started off with our data strategy, we went with an all the disk solution. And then, so we ended up with, it's a 30 petabytes total usable storage, 15 for standard and 15 for mirrored or primary and redundant. And it is what we are now. So when we started, your first two servers to do that, it doesn't seem like it's a terrible idea. As you increase that, you realize you have a lot of disk storage and disks are expensive. So a few years ago, we looked at how could we alleviate our reliance on disk storage so that it would be cheaper overall to store data. And just to back up for 1 second, we very firmly have an idea that we should never delete data as part of our goal. So we can't say, well, we just won't buy more or we'll delete things. Because or at least one of my tenets, and I think a lot of researchers agree, that data that is created today may not have the cure that we know about, but it may have the cure 5 years from now. So we need to put the tools in place to be able to get that data later. So that's why the strategy builds out. So we realized that disk was expensive. We needed to find a way to alleviate some of that cost. And our first answer, like lots of people, was, well, we'll just put our secondary data into the cloud. So we'll have our primary on premises, our secondary in the cloud, and that will solve all of our problems. For anybody who's been around in IT for any moment of time, we all know that cloud storage is not the panacea that we all think it can be sometimes, right? It's also can be expensive, perhaps not as much as disk, depending on what year it is. But it still is relatively expensive. And that's when we went back out to the market with our friends at Arcitecta, and we said, "How else do you think we could do this?" And they said, "Well, what if you use tape as the back end," which is how Spectra came along, and a few other providers we looked at. So where we are now is moving all of our secondary copies of data both back from the cloud into tape, and then also from tape onto disk. So now we have a primary storage of just disk, a secondary tier of just tape, which significantly reduces the cost and the footprint, physical footprint, because the cube holds so much space so much usable space in a tiny little package. Even though it's one cabinet, it's a tiny little package for what it does, right? So that's where we've ended up. And then by doing that, if I mentioned, disk prices, depending on what year it is, we all know that this year we're in disk prices, memory prices, and all that are skyrocketing. So when we made this decision, a year and a half ago to do this, it wasn't as crazy as it is now. But now all we're doing is moving our secondary disk into primary storage. So our primary storage tier now has more space in it because the tape backup has made it so we don't have to spend more money on more hardware.
I have so many questions for you, but I do want to give our other panelists a chance to weigh in on some of how you got to this point. So let's move on to Eric, and then we'll circle back with questions. And then I'll remind everybody once again, we want to hear from you, our audience members, in terms of the questions you have. We actually did receive a couple of questions ahead of time, which we'll answer those, and then we'll pivot into the live questions. But next, I'd like to pivot to Eric. So I mentioned that MediaFlux is the brains of this operation, and MediaFlux has some very interesting capabilities around migration and tiering, and particularly powerful metadata capabilities. Can you give us the role that MediaFlux plays in this solution, and why only MediaFlux was the right solution for this particular solution stack?
Yeah, definitely. So what MediaFlux does is it really provides virtualized storage and a single namespace for all of the data. So we had been working with Dana-Farber Cancer Institute for a number of years now, orchestrating their data to and from the cloud, to and from all of their disk systems, providing a seamless workflow. And one of the things that is really unique about MediaFlux is its ability to work seamlessly with tape as well. And we have full integration with the Black Pearl client, or we have a client that's fully integrated with Black Pearl. But the advantage that we are able to do is provide tape into that single namespace. So it no longer has to be something that's challenging to use. Everyone's heard that tape is hard to use, or you have to shuffle it around. Well, that's a thing of the past. This is a modern architecture where tape is utilized just as every other type of storage. It's just easier to get to, cheaper and affordable for Rob. So it's a great thing. And I do have a question for Rob as we get into it, because one of the things that MediaFlux has kind of assisted you with is the migration of data and to new different types of technology. So if you want to speak maybe a little bit about how you guys do your migrations in the background, and how MediaFlux is able to kind of seamlessly migrate data as well as be your data orchestration layer.
Yeah, I wish I was more involved in my technical team to give you some answers for that. But where I'm going to take that question is that the best thing as the director of the department and my researcher experience is that we are able to use Arcitecta and MediaFlux to take whatever system is behind it, and my researchers don't know we've done it. Is really where I'm going to go with that. It's whether it's tape, whether it's disk. If we decided tomorrow that we wanted to use a third thing, we would just add it to Arcitecta, as a back end. We would run the rules we need to do it, and it would just happen. Which makes it so much easier for me as somebody who has to think about, if anybody has worked in academia and research, people who are in that field are resistant to change is the only way to put that nicely. So to give them all the tools they need to do their job, and then not change them every time we want to make an update to something. Whatever disk, we decide that our disk tier is no longer the proper vendor or whatever, if we can't get the hardware, the pricing changes, we can bring in a different disk vendor, throw it in there, and they would never know, right? Because it's all done in the back end, and MediaFlex just takes care of all of that migration for us.
So the clients or the researchers just see a place where their data is stored, and the back end in terms of how it's tiered and backed up is completely abstracted. They don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
Absolutely. They have no idea whether they're running on primary storage, secondary storage, whether it's disk tape, cloud. They don't know where their data is, nor do they need to. The whole purpose is to make it so they don't know where it is. All they need to know is that it's safe.
That's awesome. So Nathan, I was going to pivot to you now, and I was hoping if you could kind of fill in the rest of the story for us in terms of what is Black Pearl Object Gateway, what role does it play, and why is it in there? And then the same question applies, or same questions apply for the Cube Tape library.
Yes, of course. So if you take a step back and look at, the history of tape and the connectivity over the SCSI interface, as you're scaling to a multi-petabyte, scale, it can get a bit complex when you're dealing with databases of that size up at the application layer. And Black Pearl helps to alleviate that by providing a native S3 object gateway interface to that, right? So that applications like MediaFlux and others can really just manage, the object database at that layer and not have to deal with the additional complexities that were previously around. And I did want to also kind of piggyback off of that migration strategy that Arcitecta has and will continue to provide. The Black Pearl system itself at the tape layer, for future migrations, right? There is built-in capabilities at that layer where we're just, migrating from generation to generation, right? So as we're moving to newer LTO generations, there's no need for needing to restore that data back up to the network layer. Again, it's seamless not only to the users, but also to Arcitecta at that point.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning too that S3 interface into tape is somewhat unique, isn't it, Nathan?
Yeah, definitely it is. Just again, touching on what we used to previously have to, manage from that interface perspective. A native S3 interface is certainly modern and cutting edge, and we're at the forefront of that.
Great. Look, I want to jump back to something that Rob said a second ago. You had these cost issues, and I guess you guys deserve some credit for being ahead of the curve, because what we've seen even in the last 6 months here is a 500% increase in both NAND flash and hard drives. So good for you guys for being ahead of the curve on those cost increases. And the other things that we're seeing too is that enterprise drives, whether it's from WD or Seagate, they're largely sold out or spoken for already, largely by the hyperscale cloud service providers who are, absorbing every hard drive they can get. Similarly with flash, lead times are ridiculously long. But you mentioned the cost of cloud, Rob, and it brings to mind the what I would call the Hotel California model. I think a lot of IT shops go into a cloud archive model without having understood the full cost, because those costs have a tendency to be unpredictable. I was wondering, did you at Dana-Farber, did you face that same situation where cloud archive seemed great, but then when you had to access the data, there were some surprises? Or how did that cloud cost problem manifest itself?
So the cloud decision was slightly before my time, so I can't tell you all of the details since I wasn't part of all the decisions, only the ramifications, if you will. But it's one of those. I mean, we don't have any cloud providers here, so I'll say this. When you look at cloud pricing, it's difficult to understand, right? There's ingress charges, there's egress charges, there's storage charges. Which tier are you storing your data on? How long have you stored it for? How long do you have to store it on there before you can have it, bring it back without it costing you more money? Or how much money does it cost you during egress, depending on that? And it's, I make jokes that we need somebody on staff who just knows cloud pricing. That's all they do. Because it is complex to know. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't use it, but it means we have to be very careful about how we use it And then also, there's nothing to say that a cloud provider won't change their terms of service later and change the prices on it, and then your data's already there. So now, how do you, when we talk about like the NAND and disk and shortages and pricing, we can't be the only ones who are feeling the price increase, right? How do we not? We should be expecting cloud storage prices to also go up at some point, possibly. Maybe not. We don't have a crystal ball to know, but what if it does? And then your data's already there, so you're just going to choose to pay for it because you don't have any other options. As far as our decisions last year, I mean, I didn't have a crystal ball, but it certainly looks like I did, right? And I appreciate that hindsight, has made me look good with this decision. They don't all turn out this way, but this one is one of those things where I'm now, with 30 petabytes sitting in one rack space, that we're using half of at the moment. That's a great position to be, to give us a couple years of growth, to hope that over time the pricing curve will come down. We don't know that it will, but we hope, that this will buy us
Yeah.
enough time, and and then you have to go with, questions that are on my mind is, 3 years from now, 2 years from now, when we decide that we need to buy a second cube, what does tape pricing look like? Is it better than disk pricing still because it's not as effective? So it gives us more room there too. Um, there's all those things to consider, but again, I didn't have a crystal ball. I always wish I did, because I would have bought a whole lot more things last year if I had known.
Yeah, I think the inflationary characteristics that we're seeing are proliferating, right? So, in what I'd seen is, rewind a year or two, GPUs have always been hard to get and expensive, and seems like they can charge whatever they want for those. And now it's proliferated to storage devices like NAND flash and hard drives. And you ask, you don't know what's going to happen with cloud. I'm going to predict, based on the fact that those hyperscalers, their costs are going up too. And I think a lot of things here's, and I just want to share a little kind of a dirty little secret that a lot of people probably aren't aware of, but when you store your data in an archive tier in the cloud, tape is what's behind it in most cases. And so they're basically taking that tape, which is really cost effective, and marking it up like crazy so that they can make a lot of money off of that. And the retrieval is the kind of the surprise part of that too, right? So it sounds like you at Dana-Farber were dealing, like you said, you inherited this problem, but you had to fix it. And now you've got the cost model, hopefully, that works for you so that you can deliver the right SLA at the right price. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah. And that's what that's what we're always trying to do, right? Is find the right solution for the right price. I'm very careful with the dollars we spend, being, a research organization. We don't want to spend money willy-nilly. So spending it in the right spot at the right time to get the right results is really what we try to do. And I like to think that we do it fairly well. Some places we can be better, obviously. And sometimes, as I said, like, my crystal ball worked last year, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, well done. Eric, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and so we've got quite a few customer questions here, but I have a couple more that I had wanted to ask. And so, Eric, I think I'd really like to hear a little bit more about metadata, right? So media flux, one of the claims to fame that I've been hearing about is what you guys would do, what you do with metadata, and how that accelerates the ability to find and access that data. Can you take us a little bit through how that works? Like, why is that important? And then for our IT professionals and scientists and practitioners out there, what do they need to know about metadata and where it fits into this solution?
Yeah, metadata is pretty much your key to everything. It's your card catalog that used to be in the library. It's the way of knowing what all the data that you have is. What Architecta does is we have kind of three different levels of metadata. We do the system metadata, which is what traditionally people are familiar with when they talk about metadata: the last access, when the file was opened, who's using it, those kind of metrics. We take it another step further by incorporating file attribute and then extended metadata. like the traditional MIME type and things like that, where you can see the programs and the resolution of a camera. And then we also have user-defined metadata, which is really where it takes off. This is where your scientists or your researchers can add any amount of metadata that they want. Maybe it's an NFS grant number, maybe it's a research project, a experiment, or a actual one of the cryo-EM microscopes. We know that when you get a new microscope in, you have to justify the storage that it takes up. MediaFlux is a great way to say, hey, this new machine that you got, the old one is only producing 10 terabytes a day. This one is producing 40 terabytes a day. This is a great storage justification tool as well. And all of that is done with metadata. Metadata is what helps report. It's what helps you understand it. It's what gives visibility and insights into your data.
So one more just clarifying question around that, Eric. So can you help us understand the relationship between object storage and metadata, how object storage has kind of a unique relationship with metadata?
Yeah, I mean, object storage is great whenever it comes to metadata because we can have it as a sidecar file with Arcitecta. So we can isolate the metadata, have it be versioned independently, and sit alongside the object. And then all that metadata sits in our object database, which then provides the ability to search holistically across everything.
So question for Nathan. So we're seeing data growth, and one of the things we're hearing about is the increased resolution of sensors when it comes to Dana-Farber, right? They've got increased resolution of their instruments, their microscopes, their scanning devices, all of those things. What is kind of the practical limit to tape storage within that context?
Yeah, within that context, I mean, you can obviously take the physical capacity that tape itself has, right? And you just look at whatever generation technology you're on at that point. LTO9, 18 terabytes, uncompressed, LTO10, 30 terabytes. But when you're putting that on a tape library that's presented as object storage, and you can scale that both up and out, there really is no limit, right? So these influxes of data that we're getting exponentially, we can have these storage systems scale accordingly to be able to manage that data.
Great. I want to remind everybody that we do have a question and answer section. So again, on the lower right corner, you'll see a Q&A box. Please make sure to ask your questions. And I do want to mention that we did recently announce the 40 terabyte LTO10, which is a different media that you can get for LTO10. I just want to take the opportunity. Nathan, you mentioned LTO10, which is actually a revolutionary tape technology set that really has set up LTO for a magnificent future. So if anybody has a perception out there that, tape is old, certainly tape has been around a very long time. So has disk, so has flash. But the great news for basically all of those technologies, but especially tape, is that the underlying technologies, both the media, the drive, the read-write channels, the head, all of that stuff has been recently refreshed within the last year. And so when you're dealing with tape, it's truly cutting edge technology, which is also pretty exciting.
It's
So
funny.
again, go ahead.
It's funny you mentioned that tape is old. When we were looking for solutions to our problems, and I was having discussions with various colleagues in other industries, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, we're looking at tape," and they would all be like, "Oh, are you going back to the 1990s? Like, why are you looking at tape?" And part of that is, I would say to them, "Well, you're trying to store 100 terabytes of storage or half a petabyte of storage, but we're trying to store, multi petabytes, way much more than way other industries are looking at." So, I was reminding them that tape isn't old. It's been around this entire time and it's just been getting better.
And so what's interesting, what just occurred to me as you mentioned that, Rob, is you and I spoke a little bit before, and I had asked, is this a new technology or tier for Dana-Farber? And you said yes, but there was tape a long time ago before your time.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that, and we're seeing this is a recurring theme that's happening over and over again in our business is that pretty much every on-prem enterprise, if you rewind, like you said, back to the 90s, everybody had tape. It was the primary backup medium that existed at that time. And then, of course, disk-based backup came along, and there was a lot of evolutionary things going on. And then there was always this core of on-prem data centers that would always stick with tape. And those are what I call the hardcore tape users that were able to extract tremendous value out of tape, never left it. And then there are those ones like Dana-Farber who felt like, well, we can do all disk or we can do a combination of disk and flash. And now, we've come full circle where tape is the only medium that can solve some of these problems. And so I wanted to, we've got some great questions from the audience. And again, a reminder in the Q&A box, we've got a pile of questions, so we're going to work through them. The first one is, and I guess it looks like this one's intended for Rob. So what is your biggest concern about your archives and caring for them long term? So I think this is kind of a future question. Like, how do you think about what you're going to do over the long term to keep, like, I love what you said earlier, by the way, never delete data. Those are some of my favorite words, being in the data storage business.
Yeah, I think in terms of that, I mean, if you take the 3-2-1 backup strategy to make sure you always have it in multiple forms and multiple mediums is one. One of the selling points for the cube was being able for it to migrate from one tape to another tape as they age out, or as they get bigger, for that matter. So all those tools to make sure that we always have data that's protected, no matter how long it is. We all know that there's varying quality of hardware dies, whatever, at some point, or it ages out. But having those policies already in place to know this is how we're going to fix that when it comes. And again, just to preach about tape for another minute, the LTO standard's been around for how long? Those things help out when you're making these decisions of knowing that we can look at a shiny new technology that might sound really good, but then you have to ask yourself, is that medium going to be around in X number of years? It's completely different, related topic to this, but a little bit off tangent. In the last 3 years, I have had very smart researchers hand me a zip disk asking me to get data off of it.
Wow.
Right? And it's a challenge for us to be like, okay, well, who still has a zip drive in their desk drawer for me to try to do this? For anybody who's listening who needs to know, eBay was the answer.
I was just going to say eBay.
To purchase one. So now there's one in my desk drawer. But those are all things we want to avoid having, doing in the future, is knowing that, what interfaces will still be around in next number of time, and know that you've made plans for if something isn't going to be around, how do you fix it now, or how do you fix it then, or plan for now? Because anybody who deals with petabytes of data can also tell you it takes a long time to move it. You can't just wake up today and say, well, this technology is going away in a week, so I guess we should move 30 petabytes of storage somewhere else. Like, that's not how that works. So you really need to have some forethought in how many years are you going to use this? What does the industry look like? What's the reputation of that technology, to know that in the future you're still going to be able to read your data.
So I that's a perfect lead into my next question for Eric is, so migration is one of the media flux superpowers. Can you kind of bring that together for us? And do you know if MediaFlux was involved in the zip disk migration?
I'm not sure if it was in that, but I'm sure the data that was on there ended up coming under management for MediaFlux, which is one of the things that it can do. We have a number of customers that literally have had white box NAS devices sitting under their desk, and they frantically go back to their researchers and say, I lost this, or I didn't protect this, or anything like that. And so that's one of the talents and things that MediaFlux does so well, is we can take any data and just bring it under. We just treat everything like data, and that's kind of the secret. It might be different. It might be geospatial or time series or video, JPEGs, whatever it is, but it's all just data underneath, and that's what we treat it as. And so whenever we have that ability, we can incorporate new storage, old storage, legacy storage, and bring those in and still make all that data visible and gain insights from it.
So I'd like to kind of also ask you, Nathan, a little bit about migration, something that you know a little bit about, particularly when a customer may have a combination of various different LTO generations, or they may even have IBM TS11 series or Oracle. How do they solve those problems today?
Yeah, so I mean, really, it's revolved around the feature sets that the Black Pearl Object Gateway has available, right? And it has, some level of disk and flash in the system, just enough, right, to provide the management at the tape layer and migration features and such that we could provide there. So you got, just the direct connections to a tape library, typically in those tape drives, to and from the Black Pearl in the library. And that's the extent to which, the data transfer goes in migrations, right? You're not going back up to the primary, network layer and making, that a much chattier area, right? It's all driven behind the scenes. And the interface and the UI is very friendly for setting up those migrations, handling them. They're set in place as a low priority, right? So you still have your normal production environments, your archives and
Does it in the
restores
background? Yep.
taking, precedence. So
Yeah, and it also helps, I guess, if you have a library that can handle multiple tape technologies, and there's only one company that makes tape libraries that can do that.
yeah, certainly.
Um, this one, it looks like a customer or an attendee question. This is probably for both Eric and Nathan, so I'm going to take the pressure off of you for just a moment, Rob. Uh, as a customer of the storage platform, so I'm thinking that this is referring to your researchers, Rob. If my data gets moved to tape, can I recover all or parts of that data on tape by myself? So I think this is an end user asking to be empowered to do their own recovery. So let's start with you, Nathan, and then Eric, you can kind of give us some color commentary.
Sure. So Black Pearl writes to tapes in an open LTFS format. And so just natively from that perspective, you are able to just mount a tape as, say, a letter drive on a Windows system and be able to access that data natively. So there's no proprietary formatting or vendor locking from that standpoint, as a fail safe, right? Just in case. Oftentimes this might be useful if you're exporting tapes and moving them off site for disaster recovery scenarios, right? In a pinch, you can have that as an option.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little color really quick. LTFS, for those you don't know, it's the linear tape file system. So that means it does handle files, and it basically presents a file system that works universally with all LTO tape drives, and it just makes it much easier than it used to be to move data to and from tape. Did I get that right, Nathan?
Yep, that's correct.
Eric, do you want to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about restorers
Y-
and
Yeah, definitely. And one of the great things that MediaFlux does and its integration specifically with Spectra tape and all other tape is um, we also have the ability to bundle objects together. So if you have a lot of small files or a lot of small objects, we can bundle those together because tape really likes to have sequential writes, long series of writes that are going. So we can present the data to Black Pearl like that. So whether that's a large object that you want to just get a small bit out of or a bundle of objects, we provide the ability to do what's a partial file restore where you can grab any individual file out of there, restore it back. And then as far as providing end users the ability to do that, MediaFlux definitely gives you that ability. Some organizations don't want to let their researchers be restoring data. I know that when I go to open files, I sometimes open three or four not knowing which is the right one that I'm actually looking for. And if those are large multi-terabyte files, that could cause problems for people. So it's up to your workflow on if you want to allow users to restore and everything like that. But MediaFlux gives you the tools to do that.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful that you can break up large objects or you don't have to restore the entire data set. You can pick and choose. So I guess that means when you do go do a recovery or a restore that you're going to have to wait less. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. And especially if if you're running multiple objects that are usually together. So a gene sequencer comes out and you may have 1,000 files that come out. The majority of the information is on one file, but all the other ones are needed. You can store those together so that they're all located on a same tape or a same number of tapes, so that it makes it easier to recall as well. So that's some of the advantages of bundling objects together and streaming them out. If you need to bring them back together, you can bring them back, and it's a lot more efficient if they're all on the same tape than spread out amongst 1,000 different tapes.
Nice. Sounds like there's a lot of flexibility with the Architecta product.
Oh,
This
yes.
next one is Rob. I think this is maybe back to you a little bit, talking about AI. So the attendee asks, has the migration to on-prem storage allowed you to see cost savings for AI actions on your data sets, being able to also run LLMs on-prem? So I'm not sure if that applies, but I think you're the best person to answer that one.
Yeah, Dana-Farber is taking a very cautioned approach to AI. And the way I'm going to say that, and I'm also going to say that my researchers are probably doing lots of things I don't know about, as they often do. So what I will say is the media flux system that we have in place likely isn't where they're currently doing those workloads. A lot of those are probably local desktop workloads or they're cloud workloads. They're not likely in any of our on-prem data center, which is something we're currently working on. What kind of tooling can we give them for the future to catch up on that sense, to be able to do it on-prem so that we can have better data latency between where we're processing data and where we're doing the work. So.
Great. So we have a few more questions I was hoping to hit here from the audience, and so we're going to stop at the top of the hour. So you've got about 15 minutes to get your questions in, and we'll cover the rest of the queue here. So again, another one for Rob. With the sudden rise, so we talked about price and cost of storage devices. The question here is a really good one. With the sudden rise in the price of storage, have you adjusted your plans for 2026? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I've talked about this briefly a moment ago, but since we're in the middle of the transition to tape from our secondary disc to tape, I don't have to worry about that quite so much, which is great. However, I do still have some systems that are coming up at end of life in the next fiscal year. So we are budgeting to replace those. Thankfully, since they were our oldest systems, it was also means they were our smallest systems. So it won't be so much of a hit to the wallet. But we were in the middle of budget season now, and I will say that I was asked why my number was so high. I said, "Have you not been paying attention?"
Right.
So even replacing a smaller system right now is still more expensive than they thought it would be last year.
So you just mentioned that you're getting a little pushback on budget increases. How is that going? I mean, amongst you and your peers, this is probably a pretty universal theme. Are you able to push that through? Are you being asked for more justification? How does that process work for you?
Dana-Farber certainly watches its budget very, very carefully. It's the way I'm going to put that diplomatically. We're in the middle of a few very large projects throughout the hospital. One of them is a multi-year plan to build a new 300-bed hospital inpatient that would be owned by us, versus using a different hospital system, which is really exciting. But it does mean that budgets are hard for research, and sometimes. But I don't want to say that it means we don't spend money when we need to. So thankfully, I have executive leadership that when we tell them what the researchers need, and this is what it costs, often they ask, "Can I do better?" Any kind of budget conversation, right? But we do. But that's what makes this whole ecosystem, worth it too. Is that if we find our current disk systems cost too much, is there a different system we can put behind MediaFlux that costs less that gets us the same objective? And again, my researchers won't know we had to make that decision. All they'll see is they still have storage.
Yeah, so that's a big one that, like I said, all these IT professionals are having to deal with extensively, and it sounds like, particularly with Dana-Farber, you're competing to some extent with all these other cost centers that probably have as much or even more of a mission, direct link to the mission. So it's hard decisions.
Yeah, it's yeah, where every dollar goes really does matter, because we need to, patient safety is paramount. So obviously we can't take any money from there. We need to treat the patients. We need to figure out how to not have to treat patients again in the future, all those things. Um, so it's it where money comes from is always an IT person's, 3 a.m. thought, right? Everybody's up
Yeah,
there
for
trying to
sure.
figure out where are we getting money from to do the thing we need to do to make us we can do what we want to do. But again, like, to be able to lean on Architecta to say, well, we have the namespace, that makes that so much easier for us. That when I go vendor shopping, I don't have to say, well, I'm in this ecosystem, so I can only buy this. The ecosystem I'm in allows me to buy almost whatever I want. And that makes those conversations a lot easier.
So it sounds like there's some creative work on your end to figure
There's
some of
always
these.
creative work.
Yeah.
It's working with researchers and academics is a very interesting place because they will come to us with things they want to do, and of course, you never want to say no, right? Because that could be what if their
Right.
idea is the answer. And I treat all of their ideas as if they are the answer because I'm not a scientist and I would have no idea. So when they come to me with something saying they want X, Y, or Z, like it's my goal to always be able to say yes. I mean, it's usually a no, but what else can we do? There's often those things, but it's never, it can't ever be a no. It has to be a, what can we do to make it so that you can do this thing? And we have certainly in the realms of compute and storage and all those have come up with some very interesting workarounds to make things happen.
Wow. No pressure. Your decisions affect lives.
Yes. Yeah.
This next question, I think any one of you all could answer this, but let's start with Rob, and then I think Eric, I'd like to hear a little bit. So the question is around S3 workflows. What major challenges did you encounter integrating into your environment, particularly with respect to S3 workflows?
I'm going to keep my answer relatively short, and that's going to be that researchers are resistant to change, so they are not inclined to adopt S3 as much as some other, some of them are, but some of them aren't. So most of our S3 workflows are on the back end. They're all things that my engineers use, not necessarily the researchers. Um, I know I've talked to a few of them about using S3 in various tools, and the data science population who's more cloud forward certainly understands what I'm talking about. Uh, Anybody who's a white bench researcher and such looks at me like I have three heads. So.
Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about S3?
Yeah, and one of the great things that MediaFlux gives you is the ability to make that transparent. One of the things that I think you mentioned, Ted, is the flexibility. So when MediaFlux came out, S3 wasn't even a protocol; it wasn't a thing. And so as new protocols come out, as new technology comes out, MediaFlux brings that under management, and S3 was a prime example of that. So we allow you to use it when you want. You can expose that to your end user or hide it from them. We give you that flexibility. So that was a great way of putting it, Ted.
One last question. So again, to our audience members, this is your last chance. And this question, I think is, let's go with Nathan on this one, if you wouldn't mind, Nathan. How are technology refreshes handled for both the front end presentation as well as the back end? And then Eric, maybe you can also add a comment to that after Nathan kind of weighs in on that one.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, tech refreshes are handled a little bit differently from our products, right? You have two components, the Black Pearl Object Gateway to the tape library, and then the tape library itself. Um, Typically, the library, you're pretty much just doing the tape drives, right? And going to a new tape drive generation. And as I mentioned earlier, those are easily maskable, should I say, to the front end users and to Architecta, right? So you can just simply add those in, configure them to the Black Pearl, and get the background data migration going. It's from that perspective. Black Pearls are also relatively easy too. There's database backups that we take, and we can restore any of those onto a brand new system. So we could bring up a live new system in parallel to one that's in active production, and then simply switch over, in a short time frame, say minutes or less. at that point.
So it sounds like you said in parallel. So it sounds like you're trying to do everything you can to protect the researchers, the end users from even noticing the technology refresh. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, yeah. And then, credit to, I think, MediaFlux in particular, right? They have that single namespace that they're providing. So you can have the persistent disk storage and other, scratch storage that they're managing up front. Sort of pause those queues as far as bringing data, down to the lower tiers and up from the archive tier while that is going on, right? However long it might take. So that's a very a good point for them to have.
Yeah, and an audience member just threw in a comment. Black Pearl has a high availability configuration with two heads, right? So there's also that ability to upgrade one side, keep it in production, and then switch over. Is that, I think, what this attendee might be referring to, Nathan?
Yeah, certainly. Um, so the HA config is not necessarily taking into account a full tech refresh, right? But it does handle
Mm.
that HA from an active passive standpoint. So if there was anything wrong, with that first head node, the other one already has an active database, an up-to-date database that it could simply take over.
So Eric, you want to comment a little bit about tech refresh and how
Yeah.
MediaFlux has the power to abstract or hide that reality from customers and users?
Yeah, exactly. And we tie in exactly what Nathan was talking about. So when you're doing your archival storage, exactly as he said, we can pause so that no data is going. We can, have it be ready to go as soon as the new system's up and running. But whenever you bring it up even further to some of the more persistent and working storage, we can have that happen in the background as well. So you can be migrating, say, your NetApp or Isilon or Pure Storage solution. You can migrate that to a newer solution behind the scenes, and then have your cutover date and just go ahead and flip the switch and then be operating on your new tech refresh with no downtime or very, very little downtime.
Nice. So I think we're out of questions. I want to thank you, gentlemen, Rob, Eric, and Nathan. Thank you so much. I think I hope everybody got a lot out of this. I certainly learned a few things myself. And what I'd like to say to the audience, if you're interested in this content, we also have another webinar that you can find on YouTube, or you can find it on our website at spectralogic.com. And if you type in TACC, which stands for Texas Advanced Computing Center, it's a little different, but there are some parallels in terms of research that is occurring. This is an organization that is one of the largest recipients of National Science Foundation grants, and they have a really interesting topology and architecture that exceeds an exabyte. It's huge, and one of the things that is really unique about TAC that surprised so many of us here is that they basically have a two-tier system that only uses flash and tape. It doesn't use disk. So if you're interested in hearing like a really large scale, cutting edge, hyperscale implementation, you might look up the Spectra Logic TAC webinar that's available on YouTube. That's all we have for today. I want, again, thank you for attending. We appreciate your time. We hope you got something out of it. You can always send us a message. There's a contact page there, spectralogic.com/contact. If we didn't answer your question, or you want to learn more, or you want to talk to somebody about your particular challenges, and same thing for Arcitecta. If you want to contact the Arcitecta team and find out about the brains behind the operation, it's arcitecta.com/conversation/.